Hey everyone, welcome back to the latest episode of the Growing a Dental Practice podcast. I am your host, Mike Hennon, and I'm joined today by the wonderful Pete Gibbons, or more affectionately known and professionally known as DeconPete. Hey Pete, how are you
Hi
doing?
Mike, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Thanks for being on the show. You're already
No,
giggling. That's good.
no problem at all. I think it's a whole
So,
effect. I think it's a whole affectionately known as DeconPete element that came into it that got me
well,
giggling.
I was like, actually, it's not really a nickname. It's not really a nickname. It is also your business name, which is
It is
a
my
great spin.
business name. Yeah, it's a name that stuck with me for about the last 10 years. So when it came to starting my own business, it made sense just to keep that name there. So
Yeah.
it's kind of stuck, and everything's been around DeconPete.
Yeah, well, you've been building a personal brand for years. You might as well,
Yeah,
take advantage of that.
exactly.
Perfect. So what I haven't mentioned, guys, is that Pete is an infection prevention specialist. I'll let him explain exactly what that is in a second. But if you're into infection prevention and control, decontamination, obviously decon, that's where the decon comes from. But Pete is your man. So Pete, please tell me a bit more about yourself, a bit about your background, how you kind of got to where you are now, and then we'll dive into what exactly infection. I keep saying infection. It is infection.
Infection
Infection,
prevention.
infection prevention.
Yeah, it's
So
a bit of a tongue. It's a bit
take
of
it
a
away.
tongue
It's a
twister.
bit of a tongue twister. Yeah, so take it away, Pete.
So yeah, my sort of background's been, I suppose you'd say, quite a bit of a varied background, really. So I originally, from university days, trained as a chef, and
I did not know that.
yeah, I trained as a chef, trained chef. I worked in several restaurants when I left university. Got up to head chef status, and it was at the time when all I really wanted at that moment in time was my own restaurant, was my own place. But unfortunately, if anybody has ever had any stints within the hospitality industry or the catering industry, it doesn't pay particularly well. So my dreams at a young sort of 24, 25 years old, trying to get my own restaurant, wasn't really going to happen. So I left it, and I suppose other things in terms of that was what it was incredibly long hours. I mean, I was doing 16-hour days, 6 days a week, getting one day off. Had no social life. All I wanted to do in my mid to late 20s was to get out there and enjoy myself, and I couldn't do that. But I also wanted a career. I knew what I wanted. So I decided to leave catering, and I got into the wine industry.
Cool.
Because the wine industry paid more.
Yeah,
And
good.
it was also, I still had my dreams of a restaurant, and I thought I wanted to do everything. The sort of the catering stage wasn't going to pay me the money, but the wine trade was going to pay me the money and still follow me on that track. So I did my wine exams, and I got all of that. And then I took a major detour, decided to go into sales for some bizarre reason. I got into sales. I started working for Dyson.
Oh wow.
And again, it was kind of like that was in my early 30s, and they were paying phenomenally well. And I still had these dreams in the back of my head of the restaurant, and I thought I'm still going to work towards it. I've done the catering, I've done the restaurant side. I'll get into sales because sales is going to give me even more money to be able to get everything that I want. And I spent about 3 years at Dyson, and then a friend of mine who was working there, she left, and she actually went to work for Philips in the dental industry. And I had several discussions with her, and she had these discussions around Dyson pays well, but the dental industry pays better, and it's a nice industry as well. So I made the decision. I jumped ship again, and I got into dentistry. And I've never really looked back. And she was right. Dentistry as an industry is one of those industries that once you're in it for life. You very rarely will go out of certainly from a sales perspective, but also from a nursing and anybody within the clinical side. It is a career for life, and it's a fantastic industry, and everybody knows everybody, and everybody's very supportive of everybody within that sort of that healthcare sector, and you're making a real impact, a real difference within the industry. So, I've been in dentistry now for the last 16 years, and it is that career path that I've remained in. So my dreams of my restaurant has kind of gone in the back. I'm a at-home sort of cook now and chef now. So I just like cooking with the girls. So I got 2 young daughters, a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. Both complete chalk and cheese. My 6-year-old is very, very prim and proper. She's a very girly girl. And my 3-year-old is feral. She is just, she's lovable. She's got a lovable character, but she's a wild child. She's feral. And
you've described her as feral a few times, actually.
Yeah, because she is feral. She's incredibly sort of affectionate, but she's so strong-willed, and she doesn't listen to a word that I say, and once she gets something in her head, that's it. You are never changing her. And they are just chalk and cheese, but they do complement each other. They're getting to the age now where they're actually starting to play quite nicely, as opposed to fighting every couple of minutes. So I've got two young daughters. I've been married for 10 years this year. To my gorgeous wife Bex. So so we've been married for 10 years, been together for 16 years. So she's a teaching assistant at the school that my eldest goes to.
That must be quite handy.
Yeah, my youngest will go there as well, so it's quite handy. It's a 10-minute walking distance for us, so it's just quite nice in that sense.
Perfect.
Yeah, although they are both off at the moment. We found out today that they both actually got chicken pox. The youngest has definitely got chicken pox. The eldest we thought had streptococcus, but the doctor has confirmed it's early stages of chicken pox as well. So they've now both got chicken pox.
So you mentioned the group that you haven't had it before. So
I've never had chicken pox. I had to phone my mum this morning. And I said to her, just a quick question, Mum, have I never had chicken pox? She said, no, you've not had anything. You've had no mumps. You've had nothing. I was like, right. She goes, we used to put you with the children who had mumps. We used to let you play with them, hoping you'd get mumps, and you never got it. And you've not had chicken pox either. So I've got to keep. We went to the doctors, and I said to the doctor today, any precautions that I can take, because I know it can be quite severe in adulthood. And he just turned around to me and said, good luck. Okay.
Fantastic advice from the doctor. Good luck, Pete.
That is fantastic advice. I took that away with me, and I know exactly what to do with her now. And then it was like, be careful. How can I be careful with a 3 and a 6-year-old? And I've just got to take precautions and keep looking out for the signs.
Fingers crossed, everyone. Fingers crossed for Pete. So Pete, so that's taken us into got you into dentistry.
Yeah.
So were you at Philips? You actually were at Philips?
No, I started my career at Dentsply. Now Dentsply Sirona as a manufacturer.
Okay, yeah.
So I started with them as a restorative and endodontic sales manager for the Southeast.
Yeah.
I looked after their whole portfolio within those 2 categories, but also looked after the perio products as well, periodontal products that they worked with. From then on, I was with them for about 3.5 years. I then worked for which got me into the whole decon element, was I worked for a manufacturer of autoclaves and wash disinfectors for the dental market. And it was at a time when the English Health Technical Memorandum had just had its draft version available in 2008. And there was a lot of talk about it. We'd seen documents come and go in the past, and there was a lot of talk about it. And that kind of got me into it in terms of trying to help dental practices navigate everything that document was then asking them to do, because no previous document had been as in depth as this document was and still is to some extent. I then worked for a distributor, Henry Schein. I worked for Henry Schein for the last 9 years as decontamination sales manager. So looking after their education portfolio, their infection control portfolio, but also looking after all of their category. And again, advising dental practices, helping dental practices, assisting dental practices navigate everything that they need to make them compliant with CQC for England, but other, the other regulatory authorities within Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland as well. And then November 2020, I set up DeconPete as a separate on my own. Always something I'd wanted to do. Always had a conflict of interest with Henry Schein, and it was always one of those. Do I take the jump? Don't I take the jump? And it was a real played at the heartstrings for a long period of time about should I do it? Shouldn't I do it? And it's a real fear factor trying to make that decision as to whether you do it or not. But I look back and it's the best decision I ever made. And yes, it's hard work. I think anybody having their own business is hard work. But it's only what you get out of it is so much more rewarding. And it's you personally making a real impact on somebody and on somebody's life and practice and ability to do their job safely and efficiently.
Yeah, totally. That taking that jump from employment to business owner, very scary. Especially, the safety net of a full-time employment is very appealing, isn't it? And that's why a lot of people don't do it. A lot of people, the 99% of us will stay as an employee somewhere, probably moaning about our circumstances. But I guess we're both taking that jump.
Yeah, and it's also like I kind of thought in sort of 10, 20, 30 years time, would I be having one of those what if moments? What if I had done this? What if I hadn't done that? And I'd much rather fail at something that I love to make those changes, knowing that at least I've tried it. Yeah. And it is tough making that decision to do that. But certainly a good decision at the end of the day. And I've got a good network of people. And that's one thing, the one good thing about dentistry is it's a good network, and there's a lot of people out there that are wanting to help and that will help. And everybody wants to try and help each other because we've all got the same ultimate outcome as far as I'm concerned, and that is patient safety, staff safety. And if you're passionate about it, then that comes across, and there's always somebody there to ask. And don't be afraid of asking, really.
That's a really good point. And just going back to the business side of things, obviously, if things go badly, worst case scenario is just get another job, isn't it? You
get another job.
Get a job.
Yeah, get another job.
Which I'm thinking, for any associates listening that are thinking about taking that jump to, buying or starting a practice, worst case scenario, you go back to being an associate. Like
exactly,
just try it.
Yeah, exactly. Just try it. That's all you got to do. Just try it. But always, I would say within this industry, always make friends along the way and keep friends along the way, because you never know when you need them or when you want them. And that's one thing.
Definitely avoid
that conflict. Avoid upsetting if you can.
Avoid burning bridges.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, whether that opinion is whether you agree with that opinion or not. Let them have their opinion, but don't burn your bridges on the case of you're trying to impress or impart your opinion on them, because you never know when you'll need them. And that's one thing about dentistry, is that it is such a close-knit community, and it is a community, dentistry.
Yeah, I've worked in a few different industries, so dentistry is my latest, and from the sounds of it, it might be my last based on your conversation. uh, but like automotive, all of them, they're actually, considering they're global industries, they are all very small. So you're not too many links away from someone knowing you.
You're not.
Just be really careful with your reputation.
Exactly. Yeah, make a lot of friends along the way, and you will do in this industry. You will do.
Yeah, I find it absolutely fascinating. The characters.
Yeah.
There's nothing quite like a dentist.
There isn't. There's certainly characters, but they're very passionate characters, passionate about what they do, and that's the thing about it. It's just one of those industries.
Yeah. And they've got fantastic teams. Like,
they have,
the support staff, they don't get enough credit, but they're fantastic.
Every single member of the dental team is an absolute star, and a dental practice just couldn't function without a good team. And it's all about leading from the top, and that whole leadership, the way you lead that team really shows in the way that practice develops. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of unsung heroes out there within dentistry. But yeah, everybody within a practice is worth their weight in gold, to be honest.
And you make a really good point, because obviously, like me and you, we can scale our businesses as much as we like. We can keep it just like one-man bands if we want to. We can employ people, but like you said, like a practice, you can't really do it on your own. You do need like 2, 3, 4 people to kind of make a functioning practice.
You do, and particularly the way that the world is changing, and where a lot of dental headaches come from is the paper trail and everything that they've got to do. But unfortunately, we're in a world now where it's really easy to sue people, and unfortunately, rightly or wrongly, there are companies out there making a lot of money from this, and they're targeting patients who may want to sue a dental practice. So they are out there. And I saw some time ago in one of the dental press, or one of the newspapers, that there was an advert advertising medical negligence and dentistry, medical negligence firm, give them a call if you've had negligence within a dental practice. And the headache that a lot of practices work towards is just trying to meet and trying to keep up to date with all of the policies and the procedures and everything that they've got to do. And that's where, if you can get a good team around you and get the whole team engaged and get the team all working like a well-oiled machine, you don't have a problem. You don't have you don't have any issues at all. But it is all about dental practices. That patient that comes in is a potential claim going to happen. Unfortunately, the world we live in. So we want to try and negate that even from happening. And that's where that team and that leadership and the way that team works can really sway that, and that engagement with the patients as well.
Yeah, brilliant, love that. So we've talked about your past, how you eventually got to dentistry, and now you're in it for life. So I love that. Let's talk about your core thing. So infection prevention and control. What is it in a nutshell? If you can keep it to a nutshell, and just for those people that might not necessarily know the nuts and bolts of it, but yeah, just give me an overview, what it entails, and sort of how it impacts a practice.
Yeah, so infection prevention and control, the way to look at it is basically it is a set of procedures and a set of standards that ensure somebody coming into that practice, whether it be a patient, whether it be staff members, whether it be an outside company, does not leave that practice with something they didn't have when they first went in. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to break the transmission methods of a potential pathogen. Now, dentistry as an industry is incredibly safe. If you look at it in terms of the healthcare industry, if we look at incidences that happen within healthcare as an entire entity, majority of incidences we see are from hospitals. Now, one of the things within hospitals is that most patients are immunosuppressive. You've gone into hospital for a reason. So you are immune compromised when you're in hospital, which is making you more susceptible to a potential pathogen. Now, unfortunately, a pathogen, which is an organism that's capable of harming all living things, you're never going to fully eradicate a pathogen because there's a certain human element involved with it. And there's obviously, you know, and we, unfortunately, we're only human. So we can only do so much. And all it takes is one person or somebody forgetting to do one thing, and then you've automatically started the chain of a pathogen potential, which down the line could potentially infect a patient. Now, with dentistry, we are lucky. You know, we work in a really safe industry, you know, in dentistry. However, dental members of staff and patients are at greater risk from pathogens than their healthcare counterparts, than the hospital counterparts, because of things like aerosol. You know, aerosol being generated by that turbine, no other industry in the healthcare sector generates the level of aerosol that we generate. So, you know, that aerosol is transmitting around, it's being carried around the treatment center, the dental chair, up to 2 meters, and that's carrying blood and saliva. So we have potential viral pathogens and potential bacteria pathogens being carried in that area. So what infection prevention and control is ultimately trying to do is let's break that transmission method. Yes, we know we can't fully get rid of every single possible pathogen area. So we can't get rid of absolutely every single bit of aerosol because, unfortunately, that's the nature of a high-speed turbine. But what we can do, let's try and break the way that potential pathogen is then transmitted onto a further patient. So if we can break the transmission methods, then we have effective infection prevention and control in place. So, you know, it's all about preventing it and controlling the actual area. So for example, dental unit water lines, for example. So we have a pathogen that grows in water called Legionella. Legionella is what they call a biofilm initiator. So it forms in dental unit water lines. The way we can prevent that from happening is by putting in a biofilm remover. That's our prevention. The way that we can control it is by flushing the water for 2 minutes at the start of the day, flushing the water for 20 to 30 seconds in between every single patient. So we have our prevention method and we've got our control method. And everything to do with what we do within our practices is all about those two elements. Let's look at what products we have as a prevention, and let's have a look at what processes we have in place as a control. So they both work together. They both marry together. If that makes sense, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as I said before, in a nutshell, just make sure that somebody coming into the practice doesn't leave with something they didn't have when they first came in.
Except a beautiful smile.
Except a beautiful smile, yeah, which is what we want.
Yeah,
and a glowing testimonial.
Yeah. I love that breakdown of prevention being sort of something you can do maybe chemically, and then control being some sort of process. That's quite a nice way of remembering it.
Yeah, it's the way that we do it. It's, you know, and that's where all the guidance comes into it, and that's where decontamination comes into it, and the way we reprocess those reusable instruments is all of our processes there. Yeah. So that's our controlling of it. Our prevention is the use of that washer disinfector, you know, and the fact that that washer disinfector has what they call a thermal disinfection cycle, which heats up to 90 degrees for 1 minute. That's our prevention. Our control is that we haven't overloaded the washer disinfector, that we've switched it on the right cycle. That's our control method, because if any of those two are out of sync, then we have a breakdown in that infection prevention and control. So, for example, if we overload the washer, then that's our control out the window, because the thermal disinfect and the rinsing isn't going to get to every single instrument. So there's a breakdown there. There's a risk element. So it's, they have to marry together.
Brilliant. No, perfect. So what are some of the headaches? Because that sounds like, from a, I guess, non-dental perspective, that sounds like a bit of a nightmare to implement. So what are some of the challenges that, trying to implement infection protection and control, what does that cause practice?
I think the biggest headache that certainly I've come across, and I still come across to this date, is exactly what policies do I need to have in place, and how do I implement these policies? So that's the first element. So, if we look at CQC, for example, within the CQC, there's a list of 30 different policies that dental practices should have in place. And those policies look at everything from freedom of information to whistleblowing to everything, a multitude of them. But then, it's all well and good having our list of policies, but then how do we write those policies? What information do we need to have in those policies? Who implements those policies within the dental practice? And how often do we need to review those policies? So that's the biggest headache, I would say, is that paperwork element. Is finding the time to do that paperwork element. And that, unfortunately with dentistry, we are short on time. All dental practices want to do is to see patients and to treat patients in a safe environment. So clinical effectiveness, nothing like it in dentistry. They're second to none, clinical effectiveness. But it's so, and keeping a dental practice nice and clinically clean is second nature to them. But the headache element is that we've now got to document it all and keep the policies for it all. So I've got a typical example at the moment that we've just had that's come out for NHS England in particular, was a document that actually got published last April 2021. And this was a National Standards for Cleanliness 2021 issued by NHS England, covering off every single NHS element in healthcare, including primary care dentistry. And what that document had in it was a deadline date for 5 mandatory elements. And that deadline date is April this year. Now, I would say, certainly from the interactions I've had, that less than 10% of English dental practices are fully aware of this standard and this mandatory compliance that has to be adhered to by April of this year. And the thing with the compliance is there's a massive paper element. There's 5 different paper elements that are required and 5 different templates that are required on top of what they're already doing. So it's another massive amount of paper work that practices have now got to try and fit in to their day-to-day of every other bit of paperwork that has to be carried out as well. But the way to kind of look at it is, I know that there's a lot of paperwork, and me as a small business owner, all I want to do is help dental practices. Now, rightly or wrongly, yes, a certain element of my business is chargeable, but for things that suddenly come out, I'm more than happy just to do them free. I would much rather be in the long haul with a dental practice. So if I can help them out in any way, then I will do. And a lot of companies do work like this. And I don't think it's a wrong way of working. It certainly works really well for me. So if I can take some of the burden out of those dental practices having to do a lot of the paperwork element, then that's good for me as a business owner. It always being there. So that's the big thing, is the whole paperwork element, is how to implement it, exactly what paperwork is required, and finding the time to do it. I mean, the ultimate person in the practice that is down to doing it is the practice manager or the registered manager, whoever's responsible for everything within that practice, which does normally fall on the practice manager. But then from a practice manager's perspective, and a lot of practice managers, I'd say vast majority, are really good at this anyway, is that leadership element. Is you've got key personnel within your practice that can help you and assist you in developing a lot of this paperwork. So things like decontamination leads, that is a leadership role. That's a senior person that does everything to do with decontamination, that will engage with CQC to take some of the burden out of the registered manager. So it's all about that leadership. But that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing for any new practice, and that's the biggest thing for any existing practice more than anything, is trying to keep on top of it, because it's constantly evolving as well, and it's constantly changing. And where we see a lot of these documents change is usually when we see any major shifts in the industry. So any incidences that have happened, and we're in the middle of a prime one at the moment. COVID-19 has, as a pandemic, has massively changed a lot of the policy and the procedures that dental practices have to work towards. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the changes. The last big ones would be the AIDS outbreak that we saw in the early to mid 80s. We suddenly saw a big change in dentistry, and we've seen every significant change in dentistry has normally been associated with a major event that's happening within healthcare. So it's all about trying to keep on top of all of these. But yeah, I'd say that's probably a bit of a long-winded answer for that one. But that's what I would say, is that
that's the biggest headache.
The policy and the procedure element.
Yeah. So you said relating to the NHS England, so the new one coming in for the end of April, beginning of April. You said that obviously quite a scary amount of practices aren't aware of or aren't sort of working towards that. I'm just curious, what is the, obviously I guess it might be like a rush towards the end. That might how it sometimes go, like, you've got a whole year to implement it, but actually I'm going to only implement it in the last 2 weeks. So, hopefully a lot of people will get compliant. But what is the, because I've never really thought about it. What's the penalty for not being compliant? Like, what is that? What are the repercussions?
I mean, in terms of this document, the penalties, I'll be very surprised if there will be any penalties for any compliance. It's going to be made up as part of the CQC audit. Now, CQC audits within England, we're looking at 10% of practices will be audited this year, of English practices, of which we have 8,000 plus dental practices in England, of which of those 10% will be audited by a CQC inspector. CQCs, the CQC as an inspectorate governing body will be very unlikely to fine on the basis that a dental practice hasn't met the mandatory requirements. What they would do is put in a period for them to get up to date, and then it would be revisited, and then it'd be re-inspected and just double check that they're back up to where they should be. Knowing and feeling the responses that I've had from social media that I've sent out recently, I very much doubt that practices will incur any penalty for it. It's about just working towards it, making sure that you're at least starting to get on the tracks. What we've got to look at with a lot of it, and I've had a look through the document, and I've put a load of templates together for practices. A lot of it, largely, we are doing already within dentistry. So from a dental practice perspective, the environmental cleaning policy that they've got in place, that's been slightly changed now, and it's being called the cleaning specification document template. All it is just adapting what they've already got and putting it into this new format. The biggest thing on there that I would say from practice is actually two things on there. So one of them is that annually they now need to get externally audited by a healthcare auditor. There are several companies out there that will do the external audit. That is now a mandatory requirement. So that won't be mandatorily required until 2023, if we go based on that April mandatory date. And what that's looking at is an independent person coming in, having a look through your guidance documents, doing some spot checks around the practice to make sure that this whole prevention and control, what you're saying you're doing, you're actually doing. So it's all about that, keeping that control there. And the other element that is slightly new is a commitment to cleanliness charter that the dental practices now have to put. And that is the dental practice putting something up in the patient area, the dental practice telling the patients, this is my commitment to you when you come into my practice in terms of my cleanliness of this practice. So it'll have on there, we will do X, Y, Z. We will ensure X, Y, Z. And this is what we're going to do. So, our waiting rooms, our tables will be cleaned once a day. Our chairs will be cleaned once a day, more frequently at the moment with pandemic. Our toilets will be sanitized twice a day, however it might be. And that's all it is. So that patient can walk in there and say, look at the charter and say, wow, you guys, I'm safe coming in here. A lot of it, the way I first read it, it was a bit of a kick in the teeth in a way, because dentistry, when you visit, they're already doing this, and you can see it when you walk into a practice. But I suppose the way that we have to see it in terms of a society is we are much more likely to see negative news than we are positive news if we look on social media. And this more than anything, in a way that somebody posts on there that they've had a bad experience in a dental practice, millions of people you see it. Somebody puts on there they had a positive experience in dental practice, hardly anyone will see it. And and patients are really aware of cleanliness, of the words sanitization and sterilization and clean, and they have this vision and this expectation of what that practice is going to be like when they walk in through that door. This charter is the practice's way of shouting about it. It's saying, yeah, we know, we're already doing this. We're already doing everything that we should be doing and we need to be doing to keep you safe, and we want to do to keep you safe and our staff safe. Here, this is just to show you what we're doing. So they're the two biggest elements. The rest of the other three specifications that are required are adaptations of what the practice have already got in place, putting it into a new format and making it visible and making it accessible for the external audits coming in. And they're also requiring more frequent internal audits as well, just to make sure that there's no breakdown in those controls at all and those procedures, which is something we haven't necessarily done, or not in the large majority.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. No, thanks, Pete. That's really awesome. So the majority, or I won't say the majority, but quite a large portion of this. I don't know. My tongue's getting all tired. A large portion of the audience of this podcast are either very new principals or aspiring practice owners. So we've got a couple of scenarios for you, which I'm hoping you can kind of help them with. So the first one is, if I've set up a squat practice, I've signed the lease for the building, I've started ordering equipment, that kind of thing. What do I need to consider from a decontamination perspective and a prevention perspective? What are the things?
Yeah. So if you are a squat practice, if you are a brand new practice, regarding the the guidance, this is UK-wide guidance, you need to be at best practice. So within the guidance documents, so there's several different elements. So if you're in Scotland, that's best practice. And I'll go on to what best practice is in a minute. If you're in Northern Ireland, it's best practice. England and Wales, it's best practice in regards to if you're doing a squat, if you're brand new. So what best practice is basically all singing, all dancing. So you've got two stages. You've actually got essential and best. So what essential is, essential requirements is everything that we should be doing anyway. So what that does is if you don't have a decon room, you don't need to have a decon room, but you should be working towards getting a decon room. And if you don't have a washer disinfector, you don't need a washer disinfector, but you should be working towards getting a washer disinfector, or have a plan as to when you're going to introduce a washer disinfector. If you are a squat practice, those two elements are part of best practice. So in terms of a squat, you need to have a decon, an LDU, local decontamination unit, so that no cleaning or disinfecting or sterilizing of dental instruments is carried within a clinical area. You also must have a washer disinfector, a thermal washer disinfector. If you're brand new practice, there's no way around it, because those two areas are deemed the best processes for staff and patient safety, but also for getting the instruments clean as well. So practices if they're squat. So LDU to start with, they don't have to have anything massive. Depends on the size of the practice. One room is absolutely fine. And within that room, there needs to be a clear distinction, a clear flow in that room. So a flow is from dirty to clean. So anybody walking into that local decontamination unit knows exactly how that flow works, how that flow goes. So you would start with a reception area, which is just your worktop, where you can rest your instruments that have been received. You'd then don on your PPE, and you'd need to have a decontamination process written up as well that everybody understands. You must have 2 sinks for manual cleaning. So there must be 2 sinks. Those sinks mustn't have overflows, and they must be surgical style taps, elbow or wrist taps. You must have a washer disinfector. That's mandatory if you're squat practice. And that washer disinfector, basically the design around that is you want to eliminate any manual cleaning. So by having a fully automated washer disinfector, it eliminates manual cleaning. Your instruments will just get received and just go straight into the washer. You then need to have an illuminated magnifying lamp for inspection of the instruments coming from the washer disinfector. And you don't inspect all of the instruments. You need to do spot checks on the instruments coming through the washer to make sure that you've got no residual debris, that there's no damage to those instruments as well. And all these things need to be documented, all the way through. You need to then have your pouching area for pouching of dental instruments. Now, brand new practice has got 2 ways of looking at it. Depends on how busy they are. And I would always say, talk to a company, to whether that be a manufacturer or whether that be a distributor, who can then match the size of the washer and the size of the autoclaves to the number of chairs you've got and to how many potential treatments you're going to be carrying out in a day. So make sure you've got a marriage between everything, because the last thing you want within a decon area is a bottleneck of instruments. So you want the instruments to literally flow nicely through that room. So you must have autoclaves, vacuum autoclaves. Vacuum autoclaves, you've got 3 different autoclaves. You've got non-vac, you've got S-class, and you've got vacuum. Typically and historically in the UK, we've always worked with non-vacs because they're quick and they're pretty trouble-free. There's very little to go wrong with a non-vacuum autoclave. However, non-vacuum autoclaves are only suitable for solid instruments. A lot of dental practices view that there's no need to get a vacuum autoclave However, if you look at the manuals, the manufacturer's manuals, the manufacturer's manual for a non-vac will clearly state what type of loads can't go through that autoclave. So any dental practice that's putting handpieces, for example, and they'll all have handpieces, they can't go through non-vac autoclaves. They can only go through a vacuum autoclave. So it is, in essence, a mandatory element that you have a vacuum autoclave. So you need to have your autoclaves. You need to have a storage area for those dental instruments within that LDU. And you also need to have extraction and inlet airflow as well. So you need to have, it's what they call it, extraction and supply. So you need to have your airflow in that room go in the opposite direction to the way you work. So you're working from dirty round to clean. Your airflow needs to go from clean to dirty. So you need to have clean air coming in from the clean side, and it's being extracted across the room and being taken out on the dirty side. Okay, so that's the big thing for squat practice. They need to make sure that they've got that LDU, that one room, that they've got a washer disinfector put on there as well. They also need to make sure that they're, which a lot of them do anyway, just make sure that they're registered with the CQC. They will have a fit for purpose inspection to start with, and then they'll have a HTM inspection, which will go through all of. So the fit for purpose is just making sure that the practice is fit for purpose, as it states. Mm-hmm. And then the HTM, the decon audit, will be looking at their processes. What are they doing? Any practices that want help with documentation, templates, they can always get in contact with me, and I can always send them a list of all of those anyway, of exactly what they'll need.
Pete, I love that. Absolutely fascinating. I didn't think I'd find that interesting, but that's super interesting.
And a lot of practices don't. A lot of practices don't think about it, but you know, that's everything that they did, and the guidance tells them that as well.
Yeah, but I think it's also your enthusiasm. You've just got a great way of explaining it. So my next question is, how much would it roughly? I'm not going to hold you to it, but like a rough estimate or range of how much it will cost to kit out an LDU.
So an LDU, cabinetry wise, if you looked at, because the other thing as well is you've got to have special cabinetry. Your worktop's got to be impervious to moisture. So you can't have laminate worktops, for example, because laminate can get ripped and it's porous underneath and it's a bug trap. So your worktop has to be impervious, where if you have, say, an L-shaped room, the two joints are glued together, so there's no seam down there, so they're smooth and impervious to any kind of damage and to any kind of pathogen being harbored in there. So if you were to look at, say, a 3 meter by 2 meter square room, which is a fair sized room, and you know it's probably one of the most common sized rooms that I've really seen, you'd be looking at anything from, I'd say, about 4,000 or 5,000 for the cabinetry, and that would be the worktops, the cabinets underneath, and then any cupboards that you've got in that clean side of the room. You wouldn't have any wall cabinets in the dirty side of the room because you've got nothing to store in that dirty side. Nothing gets stored there other than your cleaning products. Your clean side of the room is where you would potentially store any cleaned instruments and your pouches and your tray liners and things like that. So you would possibly want wall cabinets there. So you'd be looking at 4,000 to 5,000 for that. Your washer disinfector, they start from about 3,500 for washer disinfector, and that 3,500 will typically service 3 to 4 surgeries, dependent on throughput. It's far better with washers to get 2 smaller washers than a giant washer, because the larger washers that are very similar, looking like a dishwasher, for example, you know, they'll service 5, 6, 7 surgeries. Now, if you've only got 3 surgeries, you're not going to want that in there because you'll be waiting all day for it to fill up. So you'd be far more better. Make sure you talk to somebody about that. But say 3,500 for that. Your autoclaves, about the same again. So you'd need two autoclaves for every single washer. For every washer, 2 autoclaves minimum. Possibly more autoclaves. It depends on the cycle times of those autoclaves. So what's that? 5. So 5, 8.5. You'd be looking at about 15.5.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of, what a lot of way to look at it with a lot of this, because setting up a squat practice, money is a bit of a premium, and adding another 15,500 for it when you've got your treatment centers and your x-rays and your OPGs and everything else you want to get into that practice can be quite challenging. There's a lot of distributors out there. I think the vast majority of all distributors in the UK will put them on finance. Put them on finance. Don't pay for it up front. Put it on finance, on a finance deal, either 0% over 12 months, or you could do it over 3 years or over 5 years with a full service, where you can normally include your servicing and your validation contracts in on those as well. Because that's the other thing, when you go to buy equipment, it's really important that you buy equipment on speed as opposed to size. Because it doesn't matter how big it is, if that autoclave takes a long time to process, you're eventually, as you get bigger and as you get more patients coming through, you're going to need another autoclave. And by bringing in another autoclave, you've also then just not bought the autoclave in, you're also bringing in an additional service and validation contract that you've now got to have as well. So you've got another cost bought in. It's far better to buy an autoclave that's potentially a little bit smaller, but it's got a much quicker speed, because your throughput will be a lot better. And you won't necessarily need as many steam sterilizers, many autoclaves. But do it on finance. And the other great thing about finance, about doing it over 3 or 5 years, is you can offset every single year against your annual investment allowance. So you can bring it all off your tax bill. So it's far better. So take 40% off of it automatically. So what looks like 15,500, actually take 40% off of that overall, is actually only about 8,000, 7,000.
Brilliant. That is a great tip.
That's the other thing as well. Talk to your accountant. Talk to your accountant about it. Definitely. But you can offset it all. And I wouldn't buy it outright. I would lease it. You do it on a lease ownership. So you own it at the end of the period, but just lease it. Then you haven't got to fork out the money straight away for it. Because this is the other element with infection prevention and control. Really, is a practice can't work without it, but it doesn't generate any income for the dental practice. It's the one element that generates them no income, but it's a necessity. So if you offset it, why spend your money on it up front? Just offset it if you can. That's what I would do. There's a lot of dentists out there probably tell me otherwise, but that's certainly what I would do from my experience anyway.
No, I love that. That's a really great tip. I wouldn't even have thought about that. I just you said 15,500. I was like, that sounds painful, but but actually, like you say, there's ways around it, and I'm sure dentists will figure that out.
Yeah, definitely ways around it.
But that's great. That will hopefully be very useful for someone who is in the process or considering setting up a squat. So thanks for that, Pete. That's brilliant.
No problem.
And the other scenario is obviously I might have purchased a practice, an established practice. What should I do? The first few weeks of ownership, to get on top of things, and then what should I do with the practice and staff to sort of again keep on top of decontamination and infection prevention?
I think the first thing to do when you first take over is have a look at the internal audits that have been carried out. Make sure or check when the last infection control audit was carried out in terms of dental staff. When did the dental staff have their last training, for example? because within the industry, it changes so often and it changes so quickly as well. And if the way the CPD cycle works is because it's only a 5-year cycle, and they do 5 hours in 5 years on infection control, infection prevention and control, including decontamination, they could do those whole 5 hours in the first year and they may not have any other training. You may then take a practice and in year 3, for example, or year 4, and knowing that the staff haven't had any training since year 1, things have changed a lot in that time. So I would say, if that's the case, get them trained again, get them up to speed with everything, because it's changing. You know, I change my training sessions pretty much every month. I'm changing some, tweaking some, changing some, because the resource material is always changing. The statistics are always changing. The risk factors are changing, the pathogens are changing, what we need to be looking at is changing. Or as we've seen, you know, the standards are changing, something's changing along the route. And you want your team, your brand new team, to be as up to date on everything as possible. They'll thank you for it and they'll love you for it, for doing that, to get them all up to speed, because it's just that ownership, how important they are within the practice. So that's the first thing I would do. I would make sure that check the decon processes so the decontamination policy that they've got in place. I would check when that was last updated. And if that hadn't been updated for a period of time, that would need to be updated again, because that might be that it's a different washer disinfector they've got, for example, or it might be that the policy was written when they didn't have a washer disinfector and has not been updated with a washer disinfector, or it might be that the policy was written when they had non-vac autoclaves and now they've got vacuum autoclaves. Well, it's all changed. I would also check the testing and validation logs that they're in that practice, and check that they're up to date. These testing is a requirement. They have to keep those for minimum 2 years. So I would ensure that they have got at least 2 years worth, or the prior 2 years worth of logs, and that everything's up to date. I would check that the equipment has sufficiently been serviced and validated. And an area a lot of practices think or neglect is, certainly with the autoclaves, that the autoclaves have also had a pressure vessel inspection carried out as well. So this is something that is required under a regulation called PSSR, which is the Pressure Safety Systems Regulation 2000. So it looks at every single vessel that is able to hold a pressure of more than 2 bar. Anything above that is a risk. There's a massive risk involved, because that pressure inside, if it can blow, it's going to hurt somebody and it's going to potentially be fatal. So an autoclave has the ability, it goes well over 2 bar. So that needs to be under the PSSR. It needs to have a pressure vessel inspection carried out every 14 months is the regulation. Most practices will have it carried out after every 12 months. Now, where I've seen it in the past, there's a lot of practices have fallen foul of this, that they have the units serviced and validated, and they assume that the PVI is included with that. It's not. The PVI will be something separate. It may well be done by the same engineer, but unless it's stated in their contract that their unit is serviced, validated, and PVI checked, then it won't be carried out. So they need to ensure, because that will affect their liability insurance if it's not being carried out. So they need to check that. And then the final thing from a safety perspective is have a look at when the last Legionella risk assessment was carried out for the practice. So that needs to be carried out. Or it used to be, it's issued. There's a document called the L8, which is the approved code of practice and control and guidance of Legionnaire's disease in dental practice. So previously that needed to be a risk assessment from an external company needed to have that, or it needed to be carried out every 2 years. Now it's at the discretion of the auditor. It's worth the new potential practice owner just revisiting that Legionella risk assessment and find out when it was last done. And is it up to date? Okay. Or does another risk assessment need to be carried out? Because Legionella or Legionnaire's disease is one of those pathogens that you're never going to eradicate. You'll never get rid of it. But it can be potentially fatal, certainly in patients or people who have got respiratory problems. If it's not, so that's something that's important as well. Yeah, there I'd say the main things from a decon infection prevention perspective. Make sure they're all up to date.
Yeah, brilliant. No, Pete, that's fantastic. So just for you to check that I'm listening, I've got point number 1. Get your new team trained up to the latest standards. Get them familiar with any changes, especially if they haven't done any CPD for several years.
Yeah.
Look at the process that's already in place and just check whether it needs changing based on any new equipment or any new standards, that kind of thing. Check the logs and make sure that you've got at least 2 years.
Yeah, the testing and the validation logs, the testing logs for autoclaves, for washers, and for ultrasonics.
And obviously you want to try and keep. You have to have 2 years.
It's minimum 2 years in England. If you're in Republic of Ireland, it's minimum 8 years in Republic of Ireland.
Well,
but UK wide,
that's a long time.
Well, the reason why it's longer, and it will be changing for the UK as well. It will be changing for a longer period. Yeah, because the thing is, if you look at potential pathogen incubation periods, they are way longer than 2 years. I mean, Hep C, for example, has an incubation period of up to 20 years. So, we're keeping records for 2 years, but a patient may harbor it. And not saying, it's not going to be the first port of call that you'd automatically, 8 years time, you develop Hep C and you automatically think, oh, it's that dental practice I went to 8 years ago. It's not as if it's going to come to that, but it's all about the what ifs. What if it did come to that? So it will change in the UK as well. It will be put to a longer perspective. But 2 years. 2 years is
2 years at the moment. Yeah,
2 years at the moment.
Are they digital or are they typically paper-based records?
They can be. Historically, it's always been paper-based. Yeah, it's always been paper-based. I mean, digital is certainly the way forward, and digital would make it a lot easier. Certainly, if something cloud-based. But at the moment, it's paper. And the other thing, the other reason is in certain practices, if you had something that was purely digital, so if you had everything on your phone, for example, and you were on you were on network, if your decon room is in the middle of the practice, and so if you imagine the decon room is in the middle and then the surgeries are surrounding it, you're very unlikely to get a signal in the middle because of the lead line walls. And if you've got a digital system, you're not going to be able to get to anything. So a lot of digital systems would be useful if they have the ability with an offline mode. So, once digital systems come out, that's where I think we need to be seeing it happening within dentistry because of the whole lead element signals. There's a lot of equipment coming out that's Wi-Fi enabled. So a lot of autoclaves are Wi-Fi enabled. But if the router is in the practice manager's office and there's a series of lead line practices in between it, you're not going to get to the router unless you've got data points. So, the other thing, going back to the squat practice, make sure that you've got data points in that LDU for everything, because everything's going digital. Everything's going digital. It's the fourth revolution, fourth industrial revolution. My old boss used to say, and it is, that digital revolution is the way it's going forward. Anything to make it easy for everyone.
Yeah, brilliant. That's brilliant. Point 4 was check and inspect or service your equipment.
Yeah, make sure you check when it was last serviced and validated, and PVI as well, pressure vessel inspection.
And then the fifth one had something to do with Legionnaire's disease. And I can't remember
Make sure
what it
you
said.
make sure you have a Legionella risk assessment in place.
Legionella, yeah.
Yeah. So you have to have a
Is that
Legionella
different
risk
from Legionnaire's
assessment.
disease? Is that, have I made that up? Is that a different thing?
Legionella is the pathogen. The resulting effect is Legionnaire's disease.
Perfect. That makes sense.
Which is a respiratory issue.
Perfect. So I was listening.
Yes.
Excellent. Love that, Pete. That's fantastic. And now I don't want to take any more of your time.
No.
I don't take any more time, but the last question I want to ask you is, when it comes to infection prevention and control, what is your number one piece of advice?
My biggest piece of advice, for a couple of bits, to be honest, is don't ever feel that as a practice you are doing a bad job, because you're not. I don't know of any practice that I've ever visited that is doing a bad job in regards to wanting to make their patients and keep their patients safe. That's the one beauty about dentistry, is everybody has this philosophy. That's all they want to do. Some, yes, better than others, but we've all got it ingrained in us. So that's what we want to do. So never feel that you're doing something you're not doing as well as you're not doing a good job. Secondly is, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask people. Don't be afraid to ask companies. Don't be afraid to ask a distributor rep coming in. Don't be afraid to ask a manufacturer coming in for the advice. Don't be asked to ask anyone that's out there. Even, practice B down the road. Ask people. No question is a stupid question at the end of the day. And I think, it's human nature for us to think of a question and then rethink of the question, then doubt the question, and then just scrap the question. And I don't think we should be doing that. We should always be asking questions. Whether we know the answer to it or not. There's nothing wrong with getting that affirmation that actually what we're saying is the right thing and what we're doing is the right thing. I speak to a lot of practices about their procedures and their policies, and the sigh of relief from practices when they say, "Oh, well, we are actually doing it then. Oh, fantastic!" But it's that element of doubt that they've always had. I don't think any practice should be thinking that they're not doing a good job. They are doing a good job. They all are. So don't doubt it. But yeah, don't be afraid to ask, and don't be afraid to ask for help either. Yeah, help from anyone.
Brilliant, Pete. This has been fantastic.
No
problem. The final thing, and this should be an easy response. If people want to talk to you or get in contact with you, how can they reach out?
Oh, they can reach out anyway. So apart from carrier pigeon, I don't do that, but they can reach out. I'm on social media. So I'm on Instagram, DeconPete. I'm on LinkedIn, on Facebook. They can visit the website, deconpete.co.uk. They can drop me an email, which is info@deconpete.co.uk, or they can give me a ring. They can give me a ring on mobile. All my contact details on the website. But yeah, just drop me some. Join the website. You'll get exclusive articles, exclusive content coming through as well.
Brilliant, Pete. Fantastic. I will definitely be getting you on again in the future.
No problem.
So I hope I haven't put you off, but this has been brilliant, and I can't wait to share it with the dental community.
Fantastic. Cheers, Mike. Take care.
Cheers, mate. Bye.
Bye.